to the UIAAA Connection podcast. GoFan and VNN are proud to be the exclusive sponsor of the UIAAA Connection. Now a combined company, GoFan and VNN provide a seamless integration for digital ticketing and athletic websites. Direct your fans to one place for all your athletic events, communications, and tickets to home and away games. Thank you to GoFan and VNN for their exclusive sponsorship of the UIAAA Connection.
Welcome back to another edition of the UIAAA Connection. I'm your host, Mark Hutch Hunter. Today we have as our special guest, Gabi Hasenbeck, the Director of Athletics at Crimson Cliffs High School in St. George, Utah. Welcome to the podcast, Gabi.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Let's have you begin by sharing with our audience here in the United States and around the world where you went to college, where you grew up, your first job, those types of things.
Oh gosh. So I'm from Long Beach, California, and I played collegiate athletics. I played volleyball at Southern Utah University, and then I transferred and continued my education at High Point University and played volleyball there as well. When I got done there and got my master's, I ended up teaching there in North Carolina for a year, and then I moved back to California to be closer to family. Moved to San Diego where I met my husband and taught there for 4 years, and COVID hit and we moved to Southern Utah and got my teaching job out here and continued to coach volleyball, and now I'm the athletic director at Crimson Cliffs High School.
Now, let me ask you to prove my ignorance of Long Beach geography. Is Milliken a high school in Long Beach? Did you go to that one?
It is. I did not. I went to St. Joseph High School in Lakewood, which is kind of like a suburb of Long Beach.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a friend that grew up in Long Beach, and that's all I hear about. Of course, he didn't go to Milliken. He went to their rival, so just thought I would check.
Lots of rivals in Long Beach.
Yes. Well, let me ask you this. Obviously, if you played collegiate volleyball, then you had probably more than enough opportunities to play youth sports in California. So talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, youth sports in California is a little different than youth sports in Utah, just from my experience. And I know things have changed even from when I was doing youth sports, but California, it seems to be that you have to dive into youth sports at a young age and you pick your sport, and that's kind of what your niche is. I hope it doesn't end up that way in Utah, but what I've seen here in Southern Utah is we have a lot of multi-sport athletes, which I actually think makes for a better athlete. They're more well-rounded. It's actually great for injury prevention because they're able to use their muscles in different ways because they do multiple sports. But that's the biggest difference I see is just kind of that trend. California is way more populated as well, so I think that kind of attributes to that too. But yeah, I hope multi-sport athletes aren't going to be a thing of the past. I know they're dwindling because of club sports, but I do think there's a lot of benefits to it.
I'm glad you brought that up because I've always been on the bandwagon for multi-sport because I think I saw a graphic once. This is probably, well, it was back when Urban Meyer was the coach of Ohio State, so it's got to be 5 or 6 years ago at least. But he had an incoming class of, I don't know, 48, 49 athletes, and all but 2 were multi-sport athletes. And so I'm glad you talked about that because I think that's important. Let's go to a little bit different direction now. Talk about some of the mentors and leaders that you had in your life that helped you along the way. Obviously, you're a collegiate volleyball player, so you had to have some help that way. So talk about that.
Yeah, I've always been a pretty driven individual, and education has always been a passion of mine. I love to learn. If I could be in school the rest of my life, I probably will. Most of my mentors have been people I've either worked with or coaches of mine. I put a lot of value into our coaches just because I know how much they meant in my life, and I know how much they can mean in these kids' lives. my coaches at High Point University were some of the most amazing people I've ever met in my whole life. Um, and have given me so many opportunities, have allowed me to excel in what I'm passionate about. Um, and that kind of drove me towards athletic administration. Once I got my teaching job, and I was in special education for a long time. I had great principals along the way that helped guide me. There's just a lot that goes behind the scenes with mentorship, and finding the right people to guide you is huge. But I've had some amazing mentors, both in California, well, all over the place, I guess, North Carolina, California, and in Utah.
That's excellent. Let me ask you a little bit of a personal question here, Gabby. What's your biggest failure or disappointment in life, and what did you learn from it?
Oh gosh. Um, I don't know that I have like one very specific instance that I can recall going back to besides I'm a big believer in thinking that everything happens for a reason. Um, I ended up at High Point University because of an injury, and it just ended up that that's where I needed to be. There were some other things in the mix of that, and I know some of it was just kind of how things needed to work out, but um, I kind of go back to that memory of being at Southern Utah University. I loved my experience there. It just wasn't the most amazing volleyball fit for me. And after I blew out my entire knee, I needed to reevaluate like my whole life. And is this something I want to continue to do? I still have more eligibility. Um, and I'm driven. So it kind of helped shape me who I am. But as far as like failures, I try to learn from everything that I do. My biggest fear is that I'm letting one of my staff down or one of my students down that I could have done something more for.
Let me ask you then a little bit more about, so you're playing volleyball at SUU. If I heard you right, you blew out your knee. So how does someone from Cedar City get to High Point in North Carolina? That's usually not a common path, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, back in the day when the transfer portal didn't exist, I you kind of just had to use your connections. So I decided to transfer. This was my junior year, so I redshirted that year, and I had reached out to old club coaches and just said, "Hey, like, do you know of anyone that's looking?" That's where I got recruited, was club. And they were very well connected, and it just so happened that my club coach knew another club director, and he's now the assistant coach at High Point, and they needed a 2-year setter, and that's what I had. So that's kind of how that happened, and the cards just played out right. I was looking at other D2s and just trying to see what my options were, but um, yeah, it played out very well for me.
I'm interested to know, you talked about COVID hit and then you decided to move with your husband to Southern Utah from Southern California. So talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we're both from California. He grew up in San Diego. I grew up in Long Beach, and we love California. Our families are still both out there. We just knew that being a teacher, and at the time he was an athletic trainer, there was no way we were going to be able to afford anything in California. And we'd come to Utah multiple times. I still have friends out here from college and visited, and we'd go fishing and go riding and all sorts of fun stuff. And we knew it was close enough to home, but that we could still visit. So we decided to make the jump and move because we could afford it at the time. Don't know that I could afford it anymore, but at the time it was an easy jump for
Sure.
us.
So you went directly to Crimson Cliffs then?
I started at Washington Fields Intermediate School, which is
Okay.
the intermediate school at the Crimson Cliffs. And then my first year here, I actually coached at Dixie High School. I was a JV volleyball coach there. And then the head coaching position at Crimson opened up. I applied and got the gig. And so I coached at Crimson for 2 years and then applied for the athletic director position. And here I am.
All right. So now that you're the AD, talk about how the job of AD, even though you're a newer AD, how it's different than when you first started, or how it's different from what you thought it might be?
I had no idea how much is involved in an AD position. I mean, I'm every role you can think of. I do game management, I do facility management, custodial management. I mean, everything you can think of is kind of under my umbrella. And I get most of the issues that come my way are mainly sports related. Some of the things that we have to deal with is also fine arts and activities as well, but it's mainly sports. And sports are big in people's lives, they're big in students' lives, and sometimes things can get kind of dicey. So having to deal with, parent conflict, student conflict, coach conflict. There's a lot of people management involved in being an AD, but it's kind of the best thing ever is getting to do what I did coaching wise, but getting to do it for a whole school is the coolest thing ever. I get to see what kids love to do on a day-to-day basis and what they're passionate about and help drive them to be successful in school through the activities that they're involved in. And that's pretty sweet.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Let's talk for a minute. You became the AD, then how did you hear about the UIAAA? How did you become involved in the UIAAA? Talk about that for a minute.
Our district is really big on professional development, and I wanted to be involved as much as I could. We have a lot of new ADs in our district. Pineview has an AD that's also fairly new. Desert Hills, fairly new. A lot of us are new to the profession, and we just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And education's kind of a field where you beg, borrow, steal. Like there's no reason to invent the wheel sometimes when other people are doing it so well. So finding the UIAAA and the NIAAA has been kind of a godsend because they've given us so many resources to be able to be successful. And hey, what's working for you guys? What can I do to make sure that it's successful at my school? Are you dealing with this issue? How have you dealt with it? It's been really helpful.
Thank you for sharing that. Who's your current principal at Crimson Cliffs?
Kim Monkers, and she's
Okay, and that's
fantastic.
that's what I had thought. Of course, I'm not on the executive committee anymore, but I knew that she was there, hoping she was still there. You're aware that obviously she worked as an associate director up at the UHSA office for years before she went back to Washington County. And so, talk for a minute about, I guess, having the support of a principal, because she gets it. She worked in that. That was one of her jobs years ago. And I would think that you working for her may be a lot easier than some of the ADs that have principals that really haven't been involved in athletics. Talk about that for a minute.
Can't speak to what other ADs are going through because I've had it made in the shade. My first principal at Crimson was Rusty Taylor, who's also had a wealth of
Right.
experience. Um, Kim is fantastic. She knows the ins and outs of UHSAA. She knows that handbook like the back of her hand. And so that's been super helpful. And she's been an EAD before. And so when things come up, she's a wealth of knowledge, so supportive. And at the end of the day, when you put the forefront of what's best for kids, it's really easy to make decisions. But yeah, she's been so helpful. I'm truly grateful. I don't know what it's not like to have that kind of support because Rusty has been fantastic too. So I'm really, really blessed.
That's awesome. Let me have you talk for a minute. I know Crimson has been successful in many sports, but now you're back-to-back state champions in football. Talk about how that's affected your community. Talk about what a great thing that's been for your school and how tough that is to accomplish.
Yeah, and being a new school, it's not the easiest thing either. Hands down, I give our credit to our head coach. Wayne does an amazing job at getting our community involved. So everything that's football related is a community event. And we've got probably the best fan crowd out there. We fill our stands and we've got the biggest stands in our area. And it's amazing to see how many people come out to support these kids. We were working on this competition thing this fall, and I was talking to the kids about what are some funny things that you guys actually really do appreciate? And a big thing has been, our parents like to come out early during the week and put their blankets out on the stands to have their seats saved for the game. And to the kids, it means the world to them that they would do that just to make sure that they've got everything prepared to go watch them play underneath the Friday night lights. And that's something that Wayne Alofapo has created. He's big on community. He really touches base with these kids and lets them understand like football is a small aspect in the bigger picture. There's so much more to football that we need to give back to our community. We need to do as much as we can to support one another. He does that through our Crimson Captain program, where he brings in people that have gone through some really hard things in life and helps the kids understand that there's a lot more to life than just something that's really small and could be a minor problem, that they can overcome some really big things. And that culture, there's really just nothing that can beat that. And so all the credit goes to what he's established in his program. It's pretty awesome to see.
What's one common myth about being an athletic administrator that you would like to debunk to the general public?
Ooh, myth. Gosh. I think people think that I control like how much coaches make, or like the ins and outs of like salary, like the finance stuff of things. But when it comes to public education, I don't really have control over any of that.
Yeah,
I advocate for it because I've been a coach. I know what it's like. You get pennies worth pay for a lot of time and dedication that goes into it. And so I'm always an advocate for increasing coaches' pay. I'm an advocate for finding opportunities for game management, things like that. But yeah, as far as like how the money is distributed, it's not really in my control too much.
sure. Let me ask you a question. It goes back to your California days, and now I'm just interested as someone who grew up in Southern California, your husband also, and now you live in Southern Utah. Is it a culture shock? Is it big? Is it obviously certainly not as populated? Obviously, the weather is similar. You get that warm weather down there in Washington County, but talk about the good things or the bad things moving from California, where all your family is from, to Southern Utah.
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that. It was a bit of a culture shock moving here. Now, I went to SUU, so was had already experienced it. But watching my husband go through it, I never realized like how much it can affect a person. Um, I think the biggest, and I don't know that it's negative, and it's just not anything that is in our control. California is obviously very diverse, and that's just not something that is here in Southern Utah.
Sure,
And I do think we miss it a lot, and it has created some problems even in education that people just don't know and understand because they just don't live in a diverse community. I think the area is becoming more diverse, but um, coming from a very diverse area, it's just very different living in a non-diverse area. Um, that's been the biggest adjustment. Outside of that, people in Utah are very kind, and very, very patient. California tends to be on the go all the time. So people can be very short and curt and just need to get on with their day. And so I think the kindness here is exponentially higher. Weather-wise, it's basically the same. We actually lived right off the 15 in San Diego. So it's not much different. But um, but yeah, it's been a little bit of a culture change. And I actually think that it's kind of a change in education too. This has been a great move for me. Um, my educational experience and growth here, um, it's invaluable. The mentors I have here, I would not be who I am today as a teacher and educator without my experience here. I think our district does a fantastic job at training their teachers.
well said. Let me ask you this, and I want to make sure that it sounds right when I ask the question, but it's no secret that the athletic director world is, for the longest time, been dominated by males. So I want you, as a successful female athletic administrator, to talk about that. Uh, has there been problems with that, or has everyone been accepting of you? Because I know some of the females I have on here have were back in the 80s and 90s. It's not quite it is like it is now. So I'm interested in your point of view on that.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. We've actually had a lot of conversations around female leadership and how that differs from male leadership. I do find that I think some people try to go above me if they don't like my answer, whereas I don't know what that would have been if I were male. Um, that's what's hard is I just don't know what the comparison would be. I don't know if that's because I'm a female. I don't know if that's because they just don't like my answer. Um, that part's been a little bit challenging. I've noticed that with some of our female coaches, um, the issues are different than the issues that we have with our male coaches. And it genuinely is because of a gender um, issue. And so that's been interesting to observe and handle. So as I got my last year under my belt, and so as we're dealing with some different issues this year, I'm kind of developing a culture that allows all of our coaches, no matter what their gender is, to feel like they're supported, because that's the last thing I want to get in the way. I know things have changed drastically from the 80s and the 90s. I am not saying that woe is me, not at all, but there's definitely some discrepancy there. I just can't really put my finger on it.
Right. Okay. And I hear you. And thanks for sharing those thoughts. You talked about people who go over your head, and it may or may not be because you're female, but I can tell you this, having been an AD for years and years before I retired, a lot of the times it doesn't matter. When you talk to some coaches,
Yeah,
they just think that they're entitled and they're going to do whatever they want and go over you no matter what. So thank you for sharing that. What's the favorite part of your job, Gabby?
the kids. That's why I went into coaching. I had a strong passion for volleyball, and I wasn't the most athletic person out there. I worked really hard for what I was able to achieve. Um, and so I see these kids that find their passions, and I kind of just want to help instill that in them too, that you can do a lot with what you're passionate about. You don't have to be amazing at it. You just have to love it. And that's what I want to continue to instill in our kids is I want you to love it. I don't want you to hate it and you're just doing it because mom and dad said so or because the community wants you to do it. I want you to do it because you love it.
Well,
So yeah, that's my why.
well said. Well said. Let's finish up with a couple of questions. And I realize that you're a fairly new athletic director, but I'm interested in your opinion. As a new AD, I want you to share two things that you would give, two suggestions for a brand new AD in order for them to be successful. They need to follow Gabby's two ideas to be a success. What would they be?
Oh gosh. Um, be a success. Use your resources for sure. No one goes into this job with any kind of training that's like, yep, I know exactly what to do in every situation. There are new situations that pop up on a daily basis. I was really grateful our district provided all of our ADs opportunity to talk to one of our local college ADs in the area and see the issues that they're dealing with at the collegiate level. Um, and their issues are much, much more profound than ours. They're dealing with more money too. There's other things that are involved there, but it kind of puts into perspective why things are happening at the high school level because it all does end up trickling down, especially with athletics. Um, so yeah, use your resources. That's a huge one. And don't be afraid to ask for help. We, as an AD group in our region, we talk all the time. And we all know like we're not always going to have the right answer or the surefire answer that's going to solve every problem, but um, having that community support to be able to ask for help is just huge.
Great suggestions. Thanks for sharing. We'll finish with this. Gabby, what question should I have asked you that I failed to ask you?
Oh gosh. I don't know. That's a hard one. I don't know that you did fail to ask any questions.
All right. Well, on that note, that wraps it up for this edition of the UIAAA Connection. Again, our special guest today has been Gabi Hasenbeck, the Director of Athletics at Crimson Cliffs High School. Gabby, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
For our listeners, we hope you tune in again next week for another edition of the UIAAA Connection.